Now we have Professor Luigi Troiani, that I know him very well because happened to be also a columnist in La Voce di New York. But Professor Luigi Troiani of the University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, he will do a presentation, Euro-Mediterranean Trade Services Initiative, European Union relations with Americas, focus on migrants. Professor Luigi Troiani is a professor of international relations, European Union history and politics, and at the Pontifical University St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome, lecturer for Stony Brook University and summer course European Studies and Migration, head of research and studies at Fondazione Pietro Nenni in Rome, steering committee member serving Europe, Brussels, is a columnist at America Oggi, and like I said, La Voce di New York, editor-in-chief of the quarterly magazine of studies, analysis, travel, retail. Now, his most recent books, Memorie di un cronista d'assalto, John Cappelli, that he's a great book about a great journalist that lived here in the United States, an Italian, and lived here for a long time. Then Fratelli d'Italia, a book of an Italian history and migration for Italicum. A Sud dell'Europa, a book on Mediterranean development, regionalismo economico e sicurezza, a book of international regionalism and security. And then Italy and Mediterranean opportunities for development, of course, many other books. Professor Troiani, please, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes, like the others.
How could I sort out from here? Good morning, everyone. So I should deal on a very large topic, which is relation between EU and Americas, and have a focus on migration. I will try my best to be in the 30 minutes. Probably I need 33, 34 minutes, I calculate. Let's see. I would start from a story which all of us shared and know enough, at least people of a certain age as I am. USA, America continent, and European Union had kind of structural relations shaped, especially after the Second World War, even through international organizations as NATO or International Monetary Fund and so on and so forth. Then we had also structural relations at the human and social level through the huge emigrations which happened through a century at least, even a bit more, between Europe and America through the Atlantic. Don't forget that even Latinos, we have seen how they are representative of present-day migration in Europe. In America, in a certain way, comes from Europe, and they are in South, Central, and Northern America. So huge presence of Europe in this continent should be underlined. Even religions, most part of religions shared in America comes from Europe. University syllabuses are full of European cultural stream and content. Libraries, rich homes in America are full of Europe. Europe is in Americas, no doubt. The problem I raise to your attention is the following. Whether in cultural and social terms, nothing changed in a way. I mean, everything changes continuously, but this is what it is. Can be said that in economical and political terms, the situation is the same, or we had big changes. My thesis is that, yes, of course, that's why I raised the matter, we had big changes, and I try to convince you that this is what happened. But before getting in the first topic of my argumentation, let's look at an example of what I said. The Italian presence to Americas and Australia, we have also to Australia, but here I quoted only Americans. Big numbers, 5 million, 9 million the total, and this is up to the Second World War because it was the more interesting historical period which I am touching. So this is an example, a total of more than 9 million immigrants to Americans. If you look at the evolution of this table, you see how interesting could be some numbers could be. So the first decade, no, I didn't put in the table because it's too long. By the way, in the first decade, 1876, 1886, already America represents about 23% of Italian migrations. In the following decade, the percentage more than doubles to 54. So what means is that Italian immigration is choosing from the very beginning the Americas as one of the destinations more important, I mean more than half. The years 96 of 18 to the new century confirmed the trend, 52%. The decade before the First War, the percentage skipped at the highest, 57. Then we have a certain diminution during fascist period. You know, we have a kind of closing of the immigration from Italy. And after the war, it restarts again. This is the trend. So the natural trend of Italian immigration means that more than half of our migrants choose the Americas as a place where to stay and to be. It happens also for other countries, but it seemed to me more interesting to underline Italians. After the Second World War, it restarts. Even today, you know, we have a new immigrants from Italy. We have every year about 50,000 young people living in the country. Europe represents huge part. European Union gives an opportunity for staying at home in a way, but still people comes to America. Let's go back to what I said before. The situation nowadays, as far as politics and economics are concerned, is changing. After the Second World War, all of us are keen. We know that the question of relations with Soviet Union and the Communist bloc was predominant. And this also shaped relations between Europe and America. This was a key element to create the so-called transatlantic alliance, transatlantic relations. The problem is, when Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, when the communist threat is collapsing, does it still make sense to have such a kind of spatial, structural alliance? I underline structure. The problem is not related to good relation, but to structural alliance. Structure means someone is leading, someone is obeying, someone is organizing, someone is paying, etc., etc. We used to say that this was a kind of common destiny or common fate? Is still alive this spirit? This is the matter. Someone is helping us. Thank you very much. Oh. No? Okay. And to follow? I just, yes, but then I use this one to go on?
No. You can use this, or you can use...
Okay, yes, good. So the 4 decades after the Cold War and in fact are dissolving little by little the inter-Atlantic community, which had worked during the centuries of Spanish, Dutch, and British Empire, even more than the period after the war. So I propose to you the following. First period, the colonial period, and all the rest, very strong relations. During the Nazi-fascist period of Europe, of course, practically no relation, very low relations. Then after the war, relations, but structural relations with the limits I will tell you now, and then a kind of new era which we are living right now. This is the thesis. After the rising of European fascism or communism, something started changing because inside Europe starts a kind of ideological warfare, and Europe is splitted vis-à-vis America. This is something new. America, it happened even in America that elected presidents and public opinion changed his habit vis-à-vis Europe. And this happened especially in conservative spectrum. And in a way, they started ignoring Europe and treating Europe as irrelevant or more relevant than before. Of course, present president may be considered the kind of superside champion of this new doctrine, wishing the relations with the EU at the lowest level, and the member states requested to follow Britain's example in exiting the Union. This is a kind of caricature, but even before we had a kind of relaxed alliance. Don't forget that Angela Merkel, the leader of the leading country of Europe, declared a few months ago, we have to give up with America and do by ourselves. Never before a European leader said that. September 11 was a kind of catalyst of the divide. Don't forget that America refused the help of Europeans in that moment, preferred to do by itself. The second Iraq War was a kind of public notice of the new Trump anti-EU electoral platform and behaviors is a kind of climax or zenith of the process. This is the thesis. Now, the need of guaranteeing the containment of the communist infection during the Cold War had resulted in a functional solid state alliances whose institutionalized body was, above all, NATO. When Soviet system of values and alliances fall down, European public opinions and states feel free, in a way, of following an autonomous destiny, even though Europe looks dramatically fragmented in its choices. The so-called Western civilization is from long time questioned, and room now is given to the idea that more than one civilization exists in Western Hemisphere. At this respect, I wish to quote a valid comment of how and why the gulf grew between Europe and Americas, and it comes from Foreign Relations article. Foreign Relations is a kind of Bible of American foreign policy. And the question is signed by Professor Moisey, Reinventing the West is the title, and is Foreign Affairs in 2003. The question is the following: does the West still exist? Have we moved from a world with two Europes and one West to a world with one Europe and two Wests? It's very synthesizing, but very, very clear, the question. According to the scholar, Moisy, a tremendous risk may come from an escalade of the differences. Quotation: the worst case scenario would be for America's West, to turn into an oversized Prussia, bullying, brooding, and obsessed with military might. And what about Europe? And Europe's West into an oversized Switzerland, selfish and parochial, wrapped in neutrality. And the recipe follows. To avert this result, positive rather than negative definitions of transatlantic identity must be invoked by leaders on both continents. Nothing. Recipes doesn't exist. This is not a political proposal. As a matter of fact, few months earlier than the article of Moisy, while Bush made effective the illegal and wrong invasion of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Robert Kagan, a former White House official, published a slim book with the tempting title of Paradise and Power, America and Europe in the New World Order. In this essay, the blatant incompatibility between USA and Europe was motivated through an acclaimed slogan: Americans are from Mars, Europeans from Venus. In the 15-year past from the European strong dissents on Middle East USA policy, additional elements accelerate the trend of differentiation. The demographic evolution makes USA and Canada more Black, Latin, and Muslim. On the Pacific coast, Asia is discovered, and Orient comes to be an issue. In the meanwhile, south-to-south immigration becomes more relevant than south-to-north immigration. The first accounts now 38% of the total migration, while the latter only 33.8%. World Bank says that more than 43% of developing countries' migrants live in developing countries. It means Europeans emigrate less to the Americas. Europe was becoming, in the meanwhile, colored and multi-religious, thanks to the pressure of unexpected immigration from Africa, Central Asia, Middle East. Italy, for instance, was going in only 2 decades from practically zero immigrants to 8.3% of the population made up of immigrants, many of them non-Catholic. In the frame of the above evolution, America and Europe continue to expand the gulf, because true elements of even inside the society makes this happen. In Europe, the so-called American dream practically disappears. We have a kind of Erasmus dream. We have Erasmus generation in Europe. Europeans started to have their own community. And this also changed a lot, because nowadays we have an immense studying army of European youngsters freely circulating through schools and universities, thanks to Erasmus program, which is an exchange program. Europeans try to federate themselves. They acquire euros. They acquire more potential for developing federation, or at least with statutory mechanism allowing the states who wants to go on further to do it legally. Everything in Europe may happen only in accordance with the agreements the states sign. If we wish to look at elements which appears to separate or to distantiate more and more Europe from USA, I would quote some. In Europe, separation between state and religions is stronger than in America. It influences a lot policy. Culturally, money is less important in Europe than in America. And this has immediate consequences on the elite, on the way people choose their leaders. In Europe, we still may have poor or middle-class leaders. This is impossible in America. Either you are a billionaire or you don't go anymore to power. This is a difference in political terms. Death penalty is vetoed in Europe. No country can be a member not only of European Union, even of the Council of Europe, which is a larger and more tolerant institution. In America, the President of the United States 2 days ago called for death penalty for a terrorist who killed people in New York. So this is another, we in Europe consider a barbarian someone thinking to kill as a state somebody. Warlike mentality. Look at what Daniel Moisey wrote as on America risking to be Prussia. You know, Prussia was the mother of Nazism in Europe, in a way, culturally. And the war-like mentality, which is characterized in present-day America, is not existing in Europe. This is, Europe was called Mars and Venus. You remember what this is? So Venus is not for 2 minutes. Oh, very nice. No, I have been said 30 minutes. It's only 20 minutes. By the way, social market economy culture is not existing in America, is instead the source of European economy. So many and other things. But let's go to migrants, otherwise I don't have time to tell you something about migrants. The next slide I wish to show you is how the migrations are spreading through the world nowadays. This is interesting for us because those numbers deny the intellectual scheme which has been proposed in the past, especially by Immanuel Wallerstein, about the core periphery and semi-periphery. You see that the immigration is spreading practically everywhere, and as we said, south is even more important. Another slide, where the Americans immigrate, mostly through Americans, but also to Europe and the OECD other countries. We have flows of immigration from Americas, especially from Central and South, of course, to Europe. Another slide which I found interesting is how the Italians and Americans migrated. Here you have the percentage of American migrating to Italy. And unfortunately, we cannot analyze all the years. I have a table, but then you will see in the proceedings. Between 1970 and nowadays, the more comes immigrants from the south of Europe, especially from Arabic countries, the less Americans come to Europe. It's a kind of counterproductive effects. And everything starts in 78. This is the year where it follows down the immigration to Italy from the Americas. Let's go to these slides. It says a lot. At the top you have Europeans. Look, the population of Europe will be in a few decades from now practically irrelevant, very few. Instead, look at Africa and imagine that Africa is near to the border of Europe and imagine the demographic pressure of Africa over Europe. What happened in the last years is nothing in comparison to what will happen if we do not find in time a solution of agreements with the governments in Africa, because the demographic pressure will be not manageable anymore. This is very interesting. Just allow me to say about the HT, etc. This is a different way of imagining the development of the situation. So the high, the low, high trend, low trend, and medium trend. Without immigration and with immigration, you may by yourself understand how Italy would be without population, or with very few population in few decades from now. And it will be composed by old people or mature age people with average age near to 50, average age near to 50. It has been said that Europe needs immigrants. Italy for sure needs immigrants. Our girls and women decided not to have children for many reasons. It's not the case to discuss that. It's a matter of fact. And without buying humans from other countries, the country couldn't survive. Well, this is another interesting table, and I terminate with the working age population which may migrate. Well, this also something you know already. But just to close, what I try to give as a contribution to the debate, we have to take stock in a way of the changes in relations between America and between America and Europe. Second, migration suffer a consequence. In Europe, Europeans migrate more through Europe than to America, but still they do migrate to America. And thirdly, as far as Europeans are concerned, in the present demographic conditions, we need immigration. The problem is how to manage immigration, because, of course, it has been said, it's also a political issue and a risky issue, for sure. Thank you very much.
We have only a few minutes, so if there is any questions, this is the time, over there.
I have a question for Luciano. As I understand your presentation, horizontal Euroscepticism is a relatively new phenomenon. Did I interpret that correctly?
Well, I thought about it 3 years ago. I've never seen it conceptualized anywhere. As a phenomenon, it's probably older. I think that these intra-European enmities have always existed. Now, what's new here, I think, is that it is built on issues that become relevant recently. The European Union was based on permissive consensus. The whole idea was everybody was happy because nobody was putting any bills. Now, with the fiscal crisis, this has changed. And of course, other issues have become relevant, and migration, in my view, is the one that has become relevant most recently. I was telling Marty yesterday, I went to the European Socialist Party meeting in 2015, and nobody wanted to consider migration as an issue at all. And now it's a huge issue. So I think that the end of the permissive consensus has opened up a Pandora's box.
Well, my question is really, what does the concept of horizontal Euroscepticism add to our understanding of Euroscepticism that we didn't have before? And let me explain. Your description of the resentment toward strong states has been there from the very beginning. The British, for example, have been resentful of the French and German leadership of the EU going back to the 1960s. And that was one of the obstacles that Britain had to overcome in order to even join the European community. And with regard to issues, and I think you're right, I mean, as the jurisdiction of the EU has expanded, and more issues have fallen under the prerogative of the EU, there's been more, in a sense, to resent. But I can remember German monetary and economic policy being divisive issues in the 1980s and 1990s. It basically cost John Major his chancellorship. So I'm not really sure what it adds to our understanding of Euroscepticism that we didn't have without the concept.
Because it comes from pro-European attitudes, ostensibly. This is not openly anti-European. The attitudes and the behaviors are not openly anti-European. It's sort of a blame game. You know, things are not working in Europe because you are coming short of what you're supposed to do. And of course, this is something new because there was no reason for it to be the case before, as there were no evident, overt costs in membership. So it's an analytical. I'm not saying, you know, it has very deep theoretical implications. I'm just saying it's a useful way to look at it.
Over there?
Yeah, let me come back to this in a moment. I really have two questions. The first one has to do with this, the blame game, it seems to me. I mean, it's a concept that widens the blame game. The blame game was built into Europe from the beginning. As one of the roles that Europe played was letting European states do what they otherwise wanted to do but couldn't do because they didn't have public support behind them. I mean, it's very clear in the French case. It's clear in some extent in the German case, in the British case, anyway. So the blame game was there to begin with. But the blame game, as it was originally conceptualized in a lot of literature, was that European states blamed Europe. Now what they're saying is that there are now three scapegoats here. One of them is migrants themselves with regard to the migrant issue. And migrants have always been scapegoats. The second is Europe, and Europe has always been a scapegoat. But the third now is European states blaming other European states on a horizontal level. And conceptually, that may work. I mean, what we need is some data, public opinion data.
I was asking Adam to help me out.
But I mean, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was some of your discussion about Dublin. And I understand that Dublin becomes very, very complicated. And one of the things you said was that 75% of asylum seekers were registered in 5 member states. In fact, the numbers I have are slightly different. That 90% were registered in 6 member states. But it works out the same. It works out the same way. I mean, the problem with Dublin, it seems to me, is that it's doubly unjust.
I agree.
One of them is what these member states are. Only one of these member states in this group you mentioned is actually a receiving state, and that is Italy.
Yeah.
The rest of the member states are not receiving states. So they came from Italy, they came from Greece, which indicates the second injustice, or the second breakdown of Dublin. And that is, as we know, under Dublin, asylum seekers are supposed to be registered in the first state in which they touch down. Clearly, this was not true. Because if they end up in Sweden and Germany, and they end up in Hungary, they're not being registered in the first state in which they touch down. So that in this game, everybody has something to resent. The Italians have an undue burden in terms of receiving asylum seekers. The Germans have an undue burden in terms of not really being able to send them back, as they have a right to do, since we know from the numbers that only between 10 and 20% of asylum seekers who actually touch down somewhere else end up being sent back because the receiving country, the initial receiving country, refuses to take them. So there's a lot to talk about here. It's interesting.
I'm going to keep working on this, so thanks for that.
A question, Professor.
I'm wondering if in a way the two papers and respective of yours, in a sense, have a similar conclusion. In his paper, he points out that Brexit, which should have been in the interest of Great Britain, ended up being against the interest of Great Britain. You're trying to rationalize certain positions and distinguish between vertical and horizontal. The horizontal being something that a nation of Europe does within the context of Europe. Okay? So, take the case of migration. Italy's acting within the context of Europe. It has a mandate to accept or bring in. The European Union decides to distribute numbers. Individual countries say we do not accept. Therefore, really, it defies rationality. You're trying to be too rational, and I think it throws out any attempt at rationality.
Okay.
When we use the word Europe, what we mean? Not you, I mean, when we say Europe.
That's very good, and I'll respond to that. Europe is the number of nations that agree to operate by consensus.
Unfortunately not.
Or intermittent consensus.
It's not this Europe. Europe is, we know what is Europe.
Well,
From
Europe,
Russia to Portugal.
the geographic expression.
But European Union is what is written in the treaties the states sign. Nothing more, nothing less. What does it mean? That when we say the institutions did, European Union did, or Europe did, we are saying the true question should be, is EU complying with the treaties or not? Because if it is complying with the treaties, it's well doing. If it is not complying with the treaties, it's wrongly doing. This is the first step. The second step is what the member states allow or not the EU to do. But this is not Europe. These are the member states. This is Germany, France, Italy, Hungary, and so on and so forth. Now, as far as migration are concerned, because this is our issue. Having said that, you have the European Commission, which is the most supranational body existing according to the treaties. And the Council, the European Council, the states all together sitting as an organ of the EU, having certain positions. Certain member states, not all the member states, certain member states, especially the ones coming from the Soviet Union era, unfortunately, having their own culture, needing time to be accustomed to what they choose to be. I mean, Europeans, members of the EU, refused. At the end of the story, they had to comply or to leave, as UK did. You know why? Because in the treaties, once again, it is allowed to certain states to go further and to abandon the others if they don't want to go.
Which we're saying the same thing.
What may happen with the new government of Germany? May happen, because Angela Merkel didn't have all the support she wished. We will look at what happened. But if this will happen, if France and Germany will go further with Italy, Spain, and others, the others have to choose. We leave or we stay. If they stay, they have to accomplish. No doubt on that.
This is all very interesting, but we have unfortunately another section, so I just want to give the last word to Professor Bardi and also Professor Latke, if you have something to add.
I have a question for Alan.
Oh, okay.
The question is, actually I found the presentation very convincing. So my own, I need some clarification on what you said about Norway having more European Union residents than the UK. Now, I would like to know how many of these, if you have an estimate, are from Denmark, Sweden, and Finland, and how many of the UK residents are from Ireland? Because I think what you have there are two communities that have a history of previous integration, which goes back into the centuries, and of course, the fact that some of these residents hold different passports doesn't change the fact that they're all part of that integrated community already. So you may want to look at that to really get an estimate of how many non-Scandinavians are in Norway and how many non-Irish are in the UK.
Yeah, quite well. I was thinking about that in the car on the way here this morning, that, Alejandro Portes would say it's all about social networks, and so Norway has EU nationals, but sure, I haven't looked, sure the large majority is other Scandinavians, and then I think the Irish in the UK is the really fascinating thing, because Ireland in a sense is, could be Brussels wedge or cudgel or a weak point, because that is the sort of historical, social node or relationship there. So that's very interesting. And I wanted to quickly respond to Marty. The 10 to 20% only being sent back from the wealthier or more northern countries also is because often domestic judges say, we're not going to send you back because the conditions there are unsafe or, violate humanitarian law. So that's something, what's that?
That would apply to Greece.
Right, exactly. So I think that's something British xenophobes are also going to find to be an unpleasant surprise, is British judges saying we won't allow that person to be sent back to wherever, even if they're outside of the EU.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All very interesting.
Our next speaker is going to address these problems or assistance to migrants from the lay part. I'd like to introduce Senator Giorgio Benvenuto, President of the Pietro Nanni Foundation, who is going to speak on a contribution to the history of the Italian patronati. These are centers for social assistance in the Americas. Differences between North America and South America. Senator Benvenuto.
Vi saluto a tutti con molto affetto e molta simpatia. Mi scuso, non parlo inglese, non speak English. Prego il mio carissimo amico, professor Luigi Troiano, di darmi una mano per svolgere la relazione. Colgo anche l'occasione per voler ringraziare moltissimo il professor Mario Mignone. Mi permetterete di dargli un piccolo pensiero a nome della Fondazione Nenni, che ricorda simbolicamente l'Italia e l'Europa.
This is the foundation, for those of you who are interested in the history of the Socialist Party in Italy. The Fondazione Nenni has the biggest collection of material. So it's
You will see this.
well, this is certainly cannot become
It becomes richer.
personal. Will reach the standpoint that it starts with all kinds of yeah. Recognition we got. So I can thank you, Senator.
You are receiving the Italian text of the speech complete. Here we resume summating, which I read to you. The Italian Migrant Welfare Organization remain an irreplaceable vehicle of solidarity. Italian trade unions had to protect and assist Italian workers migrating abroad. They did that through the extension of the Italian tradition of benevolent funds to immigration countries. Please take into the account that 90% of the population living in Italy is accustomed to ask benevolent fund for help, for health care, pension schemes, unemployment, immigration. About 30 distinct organizations of benevolent funds operate in Italy with over 7,600 sites spread across the country, 12,000 employees, more than 20,000 professionals and experts in various disciplines as doctors, accountants, social security experts, lawyers, etc. The four leading benevolent funds, Inca CGL, INAS CISL, ITAL, UIL, and ACLI, three coming from Trade Unions Confederation, the fourth from the Christian Social Environment, cover over 53% of the activities of protection and assistance requested by the workers. As far as the action of benevolent funds in other countries, 690 offices and 1,090 social operators and employees are serving the Italian global migration in Europe, the Americas, Oceania, and Africa. The time of their service has been calculated in a yearly 620,828 hours. The benevolent fund's roots come from the great tradition of 19th century mutualism. In that century, the charitable activities are progressively taken by the state and civil society's organizations. Social forces, and especially trade unions, became one of the most important arms to support the needs of employed and non-employed working class. Solidarity was the mantra at the basement for building the benevolent funds. In the meanwhile, workers start being no more the passive subject of economic activity. Instead, more and more became the protagonists of the path to the conquest of civil and political rights. Here, the reformist culture of trade unions finds its origins and scope. 1898 may be quoted as the reference. In that year, the first law on compulsory med care to an injured worker was approved in Italy. With the new century, new rights for working class will come. The reformist method allows concrete results. There is the working class solidarity and effective assistance to communities in need. Benevolent funds are part of that process. A good example is given by the socialist mayor of Milan, Emilio Caldara. During his mandate, the First World War erupts. The mayor pushes the town to assist the many needs, assisting the most poorer, and at the same time promoting services and infrastructures of the town. Corriere della Sera had welcomed Caldara to the alarm of Barbarossa arrives at the time. Afterwards, it will comment positively his action. The fascist regime will abolish the existing 63 Italian benevolent funds, substituting them with the Center for National Welfare and Assistance, set up in line with the authoritarian corporative regime. The fight against Nazism and fascism will set conditions for recovering the old Christian and socialist traditions which made possible to put the benevolent funds tradition again at work. In the post-war period, European institutions start being built up in the old continent. In Europe, the migrant workers' welfare organizations not only defend the human and social conditions of many of our fellow countrymen, preventing them from being exploited without protection in the host countries, but also avoided them being forgotten by the motherland. It has also favored the inclusion of our workers in the local trade union organizations in countries such as France, Belgium, and Germany. It explains why, in recent decades, many Italian workers became respected leaders in unions such as German DGB and IG Metall or French CFDT. In the post-war period, the role of spreading Italian assistance and welfare to our migrant communities became particularly important in the Americas after long decades of quasi-absence or difficult relations. In USA, only Christian and lay trade union Chisel and Will were habilitated to operate and assist. In the meanwhile, fruitful relationships between US and Italian trade unions started to be developed, and CGL at a later stage could also operate. CGL was composed by communist and socialist stream. It should be remembered that when the Allied forces landed in Sicily, they were assisted by key figures of Italian-American emigrations. Some of them belonged to the American trade unions movement. Most part of them were affiliated to AFL, strong especially in the construction, steel, transportation, and other industrial sectors. There were prominent figures such as Vanni Montana, at the time exiled, and Luigi Antonini, the hub of relationships between the two trade union movements. They were members of the bigger family of Italians who searched refugee in the land promising freedom and future: Salvemini, Modigliani, Faravelli, Dosturzo, Garosci, Sforza,